press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
Hello dear students, in the last video we were discussing about the human respiratory system and we completed up to the larynx region. Today I would like to take up the remaining part of the respiratory system and I will also show how to draw the diagram of human respiratory system. Okay, let us begin. So you know that the human respiratory system is having two parts, that is the respiratory passage or the respiratory tract. So that begins with the external nostrils and a pair of lungs. Okay. So in the last video we discussed up to the larynx region. So today I will show the diagram of human respiratory system which is given in the NCERT diagram. Okay. So let us begin with the epiglottis. So you know that epiglottis is a leaf-like structure. It covers the glottis while swallowing the food. So what is the function of epiglottis then? It prevents the entry of food into the respiratory tract while swallowing the food. And here comes the thyroid cartilage. So you know that larynx is made up of 9 cartilages, right? So which are the 9 cartilages? Epiglottis, thyroid cartilage. So this is the thyroid cartilage. In the front portion we can able to see only the 3 cartilages. One is the epiglottis and the thyroid cartilage and the cricoid cartilage. So this is the thyroid cartilage. So I am drawing larynx now. So what is this? This is the epiglottis. Epiglottis. What is the function of epiglottis? It prevents the entry of food into the respiratory system. Okay. So it is having which type of cartilage? Epiglottis is composed of elastic cartilage. Okay, epiglottis. And which is the largest cartilage in the larynx? Thyroid cartilage. Okay, this is the thyroid cartilage and this is the cricoid. Present below the thyroid cartilage is the cricoid cartilage. So I will just label it as larynx. Okay, so larynx is also called as what? Voice box. Why it is called voice box? Because it helps in the production of sound. Then larynx is followed by a stride tube. It is followed by a stride tube. This is called as trachea. This tube is called as trachea. Okay. So this trachea start from the larynx region and it runs down and enters the thoracic cavity and it runs up to the middle of the thoracic cavity. So this straight tube is called as what? Trachea. It is also called as windpipe. It is called as what? Windpipe. So this trachea now, it is supported by a C-shaped cartilaginous rings. So these are what? The cartilaginous rings. So these are mainly meant for support. So these are the C-shaped cartilaginous rings which are stacked one above the other. So the type of cartilage present here is hyaline cartilage. I said there are three types of cartilage, right? Hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage and fibrocartilage. Epiglottis is made up of elastic cartilage and these cartilaginous rings, C-shaped cartilaginous rings are made up of hyaline cartilage. Okay, so these are called as what? Cartilaginous rings. So they are present only on the front part of the trachea and on the back side, that is on the dorsal side. So these cartilaginous rings are not present. So cartilaginous rings. So the cartilaginous rings are composed of which type of cartilage? Hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage. So once the trachea enters the thoracic cavity, it runs up to the middle of the thoracic cavity and in the mid thoracic cavity the trachea divides into two branches. Okay. So the branches are called as what? Primary bronchi. So these branches are called as what? Primary bronchi. So bronchi is plural. Bronchus is singular. So how many bronchi are there? Two bronchi are there. So this is what? The primary bronchus. Primary bronchus. So these primary bronchus enters the lungs. So now I will draw the lungs. How many lungs are present in humans? Two lungs are present, the right lung and the left lung. What I am writing is the right lung. And one more lung comes here on the left side. This is the left lung. So this is the right lung and this is the left lung. So these are spongy, elastic and triangular structures and these are located in the thoracic cavity. This is the thorax region. So each lung, the two lungs are located in the thoracic cavity. See the thoracic cavity, no, it is formed by the breastbone in the front, and on the ventral side it is having sternum. Sternum is a breastbone, and on the back side there is a vertebral column, and on the lateral sides ribs. Okay, and on the lower side there is a presence of diaphragm. So the thoracic cavity on its lower side having the diaphragm. Okay, so this is what the diaphragm. So the presence of diaphragm is a characteristic features of mammals. So this is muscular in nature. This will divide the thoracic cavity. This is the thoracic cavity and lower is the abdominal cavity, and this diaphragm will divide the upper part. So it will separate the diaphragm, no, muscular diaphragm will separate the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. So this is what the muscular diaphragm. So this is left lung and this is right lung, and this is diaphragm. Okay, and so there is two lungs. There is little difference in the two lungs, so that I will explain when we talk about the lungs. So now I said that the two lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. No, so here is the lower, on the lower side there is a diaphragm, and on the lateral side there is ribs. So the thoracic cavity is formed by the vertebral column on the dorsal side, sternum on the ventral side, ribs on the lateral side, and on the lower side by diaphragm. Okay. So this is the cut end of rib. Okay. So now this is what the primary bronchus. The primary bronchus, on entering into the lungs, both the primary bronchi will enter into the lungs, and after entering into the lungs, this primary bronchi will start dividing. So they divide and redivide. Okay. So the primary bronchus on entering into the lungs will divide to form, this is the secondary bronchi. secondary bronchi. So singular is bronchus, secondary bronchus. Now each secondary bronchus in turn divide to form tertiary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi. So singular is tertiary bronchus. Okay. Now each tertiary bronchus divides repeatedly. Okay, it divides repeatedly, it divides many times and forms a small tubes called bronchioles. So these are the alveolar sacs. Okay. So the primary bronchus on entering into the lungs, it will divide into a small tubes that is called as secondary bronchi. The secondary bronchi in turn divide to form tertiary bronchi, and the tertiary bronchi divides repeatedly into a number of small tubes. They are called as the bronchioles. They are called as what? Bronchioles. Bronchioles. So the bronchioles in turn divide to form terminal bronchioles, the terminal bronchioles into atria, and terminal bronchioles into respiratory bronchioles, and respiratory bronchioles into atria, and terminal bronchioles. After the terminal bronchioles, the alveolar ducts, then the atria, and then the atria will open into the alveolar sacs. So these are called as what? Alveolar sac. Okay, and the alveolar sac contains alveoli. Okay, finally the alveolar sac, they contain alveoli. Okay, so here there is a depression. So this depression is called as cardiac notch. Why it is called cardiac notch? Because heart comes here. Okay, so it is in this region the heart lies, in this depression the heart lies. Okay, so it is called as cardiac notch. Okay, so this is the muscular diaphragm, and each lung is covered by a tube membranes. They are called as pleural membranes. The outer one is called as the parietal pleura, and the inner one is called as visceral pleura. Okay. So each lung is covered by two membranes, and these membranes are called as pleura or pleural membranes. So what are these membranes called? So I write here pleural membranes. So in between the two pleural membranes, some narrow space is present here. So this space is filled with a pleural fluid. Okay. So this space, narrow space between the two pleural membranes is filled with a pleural fluid. Okay. So this is what the diagram of human respiratory system. Okay. So the human respiratory system consists of the respiratory tract and the two lungs. The respiratory tract, it begins with the pair of external nostrils, then nasal chamber. The nasal chamber opens into nasopharynx through the internal nares, and then nasopharynx opens into oropharynx, then laryngopharynx, then laryngopharynx opens into what? Larynx through an opening that is called as glottis, and that glottis now it is covered by a cartilaginous flap, that is a leaf-like structure, that is called as what? Epiglottis. Okay. And so this is what the larynx, I said larynx is made up of 9 cartilages. So the largest one is the thyroid cartilage, it is visible in the from the front, and after the larynx runs the trachea. So the next part of the respiratory system after the larynx is the trachea. Okay. So trachea is also called as what? Windpipe, and this is supported with C-shaped hyaline cartilaginous rings. Okay. And so these cartilaginous rings are also present here. Okay. Then when the trachea enters the mid-thoracic cavity, it will divide into two branches. These two branches are called as what? Primary bronchi. Okay. So these primary bronchi on entering into the lungs, they start dividing. Okay. So the primary bronchus divide further to form secondary bronchi. The secondary bronchi in turn divide to form tertiary bronchi, and the tertiary bronchi divide repeatedly, that results in the bronchioles. Okay. So bronchioles into terminal bronchiole, then the respiratory bronchiole, then the alveolar duct, then atria, and then alveolar sac, and finally the alveoli. Okay. So and these are the two lungs, they are located in the thoracic cavity. So the thoracic cavity in the front side, here comes the breastbone, that is the sternum on the ventral side, and on the back side there is a vertebral column, and on the lateral sides are ribs, okay, and on the lower side diaphragm. Okay. So the presence of diaphragm is a characteristic feature of mammals. Okay. So this diaphragm will separate the upper thoracic cavity from the lower abdominal cavity. Understood? So this is what the diagram of human respiratory system, which is given in the NCERT book. Okay. So if they ask to write the diagram of human respiratory system, you have to write this diagram. Okay. Now I will explain one by one in detail. So up to larynx we already discussed. So I will take up trachea now. Okay. So let us start trachea. So I said trachea is also called as what? windpipe. It's also called as windpipe. It measures about 12 centimeter long and 2.5 centimeter wide. So trachea, what is the function of trachea? It helps in the conduction of air. So it is a passageway for the air. So the trachea, it arises from the larynx. Okay, so it arises from, so here comes the larynx. So the trachea will arise from the larynx. Okay, arise from the larynx and it goes up to the mid-thoracic cavity. It goes up to the mid-thoracic cavity. So it extends from larynx and it goes up to the mid-thoracic cavity. Okay, so it is a straight tube. It is a straight tube. I said it measures about 12 centimeter long and 2.5 centimeter wide. Okay. So here the inner surface of trachea, so it is a tube-like structure. Okay. So the inner surface of the trachea. So this inner lining of the trachea. So this inner lining of the trachea is made up of pseudostratified, ciliated, columnar, glandular epithelium. Pseudostratified, ciliated, columnar, glandular epithelium. Stratified, ciliated, columnar, glandular epithelium. Okay. So what is the pseudostratified, ciliated, columnar, glandular epithelium? So as I already said, so there are 4 different types of animal tissues, right? Epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue and the nervous tissue. So these are the 4 different types of animal tissues. So this pseudostratified, ciliated, columnar, glandular epithelium is a type of epithelial tissue. So in epithelial tissue there are 2 types, okay, mainly. So one is the simple epithelium and another one is the stratified epithelium or the complex epithelium. So simple epithelium means what? So if it consists of a single layer of cells, so that will become a simple epithelium. So here comes the stratified. So what is stratified here? So stratified means if the epithelium consists of many layers of cells, okay, so then it is called as what? Stratified. So in simple epithelium there are different types, or they like a squamous epithelium, cuboidal epithelium, columnar epithelium and so on. So that you will study in detail in the later chapters. See here, it is called pseudostratified. I said stratified is having many layers of cells, right? Here I have written pseudostratified. So pseudostratified means what? False stratified. Okay. So here the type of cells present are ciliated columnar cells. Okay. Ciliated columnar cells along with the mucus secreting goblet cells. Okay. So that cell right here. So it is a single layer of cells only, like this, the columnar epithelial cells. Okay. So this columnar epithelium. So I said the simple epithelium, squamous epithelium, cuboidal epithelium and columnar epithelium, right? So the columnar epithelium is is having a long taller cells. Okay, like this. See here, it is pseudostratified. It is not, this epithelium is not present in many layers. It is single layer only, but it looks like many layered because of the difference in the size of the cells. Okay, the cells are placed at different height so that it looks like multi-layered, many layers. Okay, so that's why it is called as pseudostratified epithelium. Ciliated columnar. So these are the columnar epithelial cells. If the columnar epithelial cells is having the cilia on its outer surface, then it will become ciliated columnar epithelium. So glandular. So here mucus secreting cells are also present here. Okay. So this will secrete the mucus. Okay. So this type of epithelium is called as what? Pseudostratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium. Okay, so this you will learn in another chapter, that is structural organization in animals. Okay, so but here you just know that inner surface of the lining or the inner lining of the trachea is made up of which epithelium? Pseudostratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium. Understood? Okay, now so the same epithelium is also present in the respiratory region of the nasal chamber. Okay. So what is the function of this epithelium in the tracheal tube? Okay. So here I said this epithelium also contain mucus secreting goblet cells. No, so the goblet cells will secrete the mucus. Okay. So the mucus will keep the wall of the trachea moist, and also it traps the dust particles that entered along with the inhaled air. Okay. So now what ciliated epithelium, cilia present on the outer surface, no. So the beating action of the cilia, so beating action of the cilia towards the upper surface, okay, will carry the mucus containing dust particles up to the throat region. Okay, from where from where it is spitted out. Okay, so that is the function of pseudostratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium. It cleans up the air by removing the dust particles. Okay, now as I said, each toward the entire length of trachea, the trachea is supported by cartilaginous rings. Okay, cartilaginous rings. So if it is a trachea, so the entire length of the trachea is supported by cartilaginous rings like this. They are placed one above the other. So these are present only on the front part of the trachea, but on the back side these cartilaginous rings are not there. Okay, so it is having only the muscles. Okay, so this is on the dorsal side where esophagus comes here. Okay, so the windpipe, that is the trachea on the front, and here is the esophagus. Okay, so it is in the region of esophagus. There are no cartilaginous rings. Okay, that's why it appears like a C shape. Okay, so that's why these are called as what? C shaped, incomplete cartilaginous rings. Okay, so throughout the entire length of the trachea is supported by C shaped. It is important for NEET, both this epithelium, pseudostratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium, and this C shaped incomplete cartilaginous rings. Okay, and one more important thing here is it is composed of hyaline cartilage. The type of cartilage here is hyaline cartilage. So these are called as hyaline cartilaginous rings or hyaline cartilage, C-shaped hyaline cartilage rings. Okay, so what is the function of this cartilaginous rings then? See here these cartilaginous rings now that they support the trachea. Okay, so it will prevent the trachea from collapsing. Okay, so it prevents the trachea from flattening. So it maintains the shape of the trachea. Okay, so the main function of this C-shaped hyaline cartilage rings is to prevent the collapsing of trachea during the inspiration. Okay, so that is what the functioning of the cartilaginous rings what present in the trachea. Okay, so the trachea, it is also called as what? Windpipe. It is meant for the conduction of air. It will conduct the air from larynx to the further branches. And so here, what is the length of a trachea? 12 centimeter long, 2.5 centimeter wide, and it extends from the larynx up to the middle of the thoracic cavity, and internally it is lined with pseudostratified ciliated columnar glandular epithelium, and it is provided with, it is supported by a C-shaped incomplete hyaline cartilaginous rings. Understood? And the number of hyaline cartilage rings are 16 to 20. Okay. So how the cartilaginous rings are how many in number? They are 16 to 20 in number. Understood? Okay. So this is what the trachea. Okay. Now the trachea, so when it comes to the mid thoracic cavity, and at the level of mid thoracic, that is at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra, it divides into branches. Okay. Like this. Okay. So the trachea, when it comes to the mid thoracic cavity at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra. Okay. So what is this fifth thoracic vertebra? Vertebra is nothing but a small bone in the vertebral column. Okay. So the vertebral column is made up of number of small bones. So they are called as what? Vertebrae. Okay. So according to the region, they are named as cervical vertebrae. The vertebrae which are present in the neck region, no. So they are called as cervical vertebrae, and which are present in the thoracic region, they are called as the thoracic vertebrae, and lumbar vertebrae, and so on. So that we will study in the later chapter. So here, so in thoracic vertebrae there are 12 vertebrae are present. So at the level of fifth thoracic vertebrae, when the trachea comes at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra, it divides into two branches. Okay. So what are these branches called? Primary bronchi. Okay. So this is called as the right primary bronchus, and this is the left primary bronchus. Okay. So when the trachea comes at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra, it divides into two branches. So the branches are called as what? Primary bronchi. So this is the right primary bronchus, and this is the left primary bronchus. Okay. So there is little difference in the right and as well as the left primary bronchus. Okay. So let us see the difference between the right primary bronchus and left primary bronchus. Okay. So are you seeing this? This is primary bronchus and this is the right primary bronchus and this is the left primary bronchus. Did you find any difference here? See here, this right primary bronchus, it is short when compared to the left primary bronchus. Okay, and see the size of the lumen. Okay, the right primary bronchus is wider. Okay, it is wider, but whereas the left primary bronchus, it is narrower than the right one. Okay, and it is more vertical. This primary bronchus, no, right primary bronchus, it is more vertical like this. It runs like this, but whereas left primary bronchus, no, it is more horizontal like this. It runs like this. Okay, so these are the differences between the primary right and the left primary bronchus. See, there is a difference in the size of the lumen, that is diameter. So the right primary bronchus is wider when compared to the left primary bronchus. So right primary bronchus is shorter, left is longer when compared to the right primary bronchus. It is wider, it is narrower. Okay, it is more vertical, but it is more horizontal. Okay, so you have to remember all these things for your NEET exam. So the trachea will divide into the right and the left primary bronchi at the level of 5th thoracic vertebra. Okay, so this question may be asked for your NEET. And you have to remember the difference between the right primary bronchus and the left primary bronchus. Okay. Now, each primary bronchus will enter into the respective lungs. So here comes the right lung, here comes the left lung. Okay. Now, each primary bronchus on entering into the lung. So this is the right primary bronchus, no? So this right primary bronchus on entering into the lungs, it will divide. Okay, so it will divide to form a secondary bronchus. Okay, so here in right lung there are 3 lobes. Okay, so the right primary bronchus on entering into the lungs, it divides like this. Like this. Okay. So these branches are called as what? The secondary bronchi, and the number of secondary bronchi in right lung is 3. See, 1, 2, 3, and 1 going into each lobe. So this is the superior lobe, this is the middle lobe, and this is the inferior lobe. Okay. So here the primary bronchus in the right lung, it divides into 3 tubes. That is, they are called as secondary bronchi. So the secondary bronchi in right lung is 3 in number. Okay. Later on, the secondary bronchi again divides further. Okay. So it will divides to form tertiary bronchi. Here. Okay. So the number of tertiary bronchi in the right lung is 10. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. The number of tertiary bronchi in right lung is 10. Okay. Now, this left primary bronchus. So the left primary bronchus on entering into the left lung, it will divide. So this left lung, no, it is divided into 2 lobes. It is having 2 lobes, okay, and the left primary bronchus will divide further to form a secondary bronchi. Okay, the number of secondary bronchi in the left lung is how many? 2. Okay, and the secondary bronchi in turn divides it will divide further to form a tertiary bronchi. Okay. So, the number of tertiary bronchi in left lung is 8. See 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So, the number of trachea, how many? Trachea, 1 in number. Okay. Then primary bronchi. So, these are 2. Okay na? So, how many in number? Primary bronchi. Primary bronchi 2 in number, okay, and the number of secondary bronchi in right lung, number of secondary bronchi in right lung, how many? 3. The number of secondary bronchi in left lung, how many? 1, 2. Okay. Now, tertiary bronchi. The number of tertiary bronchi in right lung, is 10. And the number of tertiary bronchi in left lung is 8. Okay. So, the number of primary bronchi are 2, right primary bronchus and the left primary bronchus. The right primary bronchus on entering will enter into the right lung, and once it enter into the right lung, it divides to form a secondary bronchi. So, as there are 3 lobes in the right lung, so the primary bronchus will divide into secondary bronchi, no. So, the number of secondary bronchi, 1 branch will go into each lobe, okay. So, 1 will go into each lobe. So, there are how many secondary bronchi in the right lung? 3, okay. Now, in the left lung there are 2 lobes, no, and the primary bronchus divides and into secondary bronchi. So, each one will go into 1 lobe. So, there are the number of secondary bronchi in left lung is 2. Again, in the right lung the secondary bronchi divides to form tertiary bronchi. So, the number of tertiary bronchi in right lung is 10, whereas in left lung it is 8. Okay, understood clearly? Okay. Now, so this branching, no, so the branching inside the lungs, it looks like an inverted tree. Okay, so that's why it is called as a bronchial tree, respiratory tree, and so on. Okay, so now I will show how the branching is there in the 2 lungs. Okay, so like this is up to tertiary bronchi. Now again the tertiary bronchi will divide to form bronchiole, the bronchioles into terminal bronchiole into respiratory bronchiole, then to alveolar ducts, then atria, then alveolar sac, and finally the alveoli. So I will show the branching in the lungs, how branching is there in the lungs. I start up a trachea. So, I start with trachea. See, so this is what the trachea, windpipe. Okay, now. So this trachea will divide into two branches, right? At the level of fifth thoracic vertebra, it will divide into two branches. Okay. So this is called as what? This is the trachea. Okay. Then this is what? It will divide into two branches now, that is called as primary bronchi. So I am labeling only one branch, so that is why it is I write here as primary bronchus, primary bronchus, and each primary bronchus in turn divides. Okay. So each primary bronchi in turn divides to form secondary bronchi. So this is called as secondary bronchus. So I labeled this branch as a secondary bronchus, and each secondary bronchus will further divide. Okay. So this is called as what? Tertiary bronchi. The secondary bronchi divides further into small tubes. So these tubes are called as what? Tertiary bronchi. So I am labeling only one branch now. Tertiary bronchus. Bronchus is singular, bronchi is plural. Okay. Now, each tertiary, see up to this region you will find C-shaped incomplete cartilaginous rings. So, C-shaped incomplete cartilaginous rings are also present in trachea. Okay. Now, in primary bronchi also these cartilaginous rings are present. And I draw this little wider, secondary bronchi. Okay. So here also you can find the cartilaginous rings. Now each secondary bronchus in turn divides to form tertiary bronchi. So here also you will find cartilaginous rings. Okay. Now this tertiary bronchi, so the cartilaginous rings are present up to the tertiary bronchi. Okay. So in trachea also these cartilaginous rings are present. They are present in primary bronchi, they are present in secondary bronchi, and they are also present in tertiary bronchi. Okay. Now the tertiary bronchi will divide many times. Okay. It divides and redivides into a small tubes, they are called as the bronchioles. Okay. Each tertiary bronchus divides many times forms a small tubes, they are called as bronchioles. Bronchioles. Okay. Now, each bronchiole, it will divide to form terminal bronchiole. Terminal bronchiole. Okay. So, the bronchioles in turn divide to form terminal bronchiole, and up to this is the conducting zone. So, I said the respiratory tract, no. So, the respiratory tract, depending upon the functions, functionally it is differentiated into two zones. One is the conducting zone and another one is the respiratory zone. So, starting from external nostril up to the terminal bronchiole is the conducting zone. Okay. So, the conducting zone will end up here. Okay. So, what is the main function? It helps in from external nostrils up to the terminal bronchiole. This main function is the conduction of air from the atmosphere. So, the atmospheric air is inhaled through the external nostrils, no. So, thereafter the air is conducted through the respiratory tract, okay. Up to the terminal bronchiole is the conducting zone, and this again the terminal bronchioles in turn divides to very short tubes they are called as the respiratory bronchioles. Okay, the terminal bronchioles in turn divide to form respiratory bronchioles. Okay. So, these respiratory bronchioles are the narrowest tubes. Okay. So, they are the narrowest airways of the respiratory passages. Okay. They measure about, they are nearly only 0.5 millimeter in diameter. Okay. So, these are the narrowest tubes of the lung. Okay. Then, so from the respiratory bronchiole begins the respiratory zone. Up to terminal bronchiole is the conducting zone, and from the respiratory bronchiole begins the respiratory zone. So, this respiratory bronchiole, it will further divide. Okay. It will further divide repeatedly into a number of ducts. Number of ducts. So, these are called as alveolar ducts. These are called as alveolar ducts. Okay. Now, the alveolar duct opens into an expanded passage. An expanded passage called as atria. Okay, now the atria will open into alveolar sac. Okay. So, these are called as what? The alveolar sac. So, alveolar sacs. Okay. Now, the alveolar sacs contain a group of or cluster of alveoli. So, this single, what I have written, no? So, this single, these are called as, so all these are alveoli. These are all alveoli. So, one I am going to label here as alveolus. Okay. So, the alveoli are, it is the alveoli, it is through the wall of the alveoli the exchange of gases will take place. Okay na? So up to this is bronchial tree. It looks like, as it looks like a tree, it is called as a tree, bronchial tree, and this is respiratory tree. This is respiratory tree. So this is how the branching is present in the lungs. So inside the lungs you will find this type of branching. Okay. So trachea, primary bronchi. The primary bronchi will enter into the lungs, and when it enter into the lungs, it will divides, redivides, and finally it will end up in alveoli. Okay. So this is a branching what it is present inside the lungs. Okay. Understood clearly? So the primary bronchi enters in, after entering in the lung, enter into the lungs, it will divide to form secondary bronchi, and each secondary bronchus divides further to form tertiary bronchi, and each tertiary bronchus, so it will divide many times, and finally that results in small tubes, they are called as the bronchiole. Okay. And the bronchiole again divides repeatedly from terminal bronchiole, and the terminal bronchiole divides further to form respiratory bronchioles, and the respiratory bronchioles will divide repeatedly into a number of alveolar ducts, and alveolar ducts open into the wider region, that is expanded region, that is called as atria, and the atria will open into the alveolar sacs which contains the alveoli. Okay. So I write the alveoli. So all these things for your NEET exam. Okay. This is for NEET. So for PU this much is not there. It is for your NEET exams. Okay. I will write alveoli now. So single alveolus. So it is a bag-like structure. Each alveolus is, so nearly 300 million alveoli is present in both the lungs. So how many alveoli are present in both the lungs? So in both the lungs nearly 300 million alveoli are present in both the lungs. So these alveoli are the structural and the functional unit of lungs. So which are the structural and functional unit of lungs? Alveoli. Okay. So I will draw a single alveolus here. It is a bag-like structure. So it is internally it is lined with squamous epithelium. This is a simple squamous epithelium. This is the simple squamous epithelium. So the wall of the alveoli is very thin, it is moist, and it is highly vascularized. It is richly supplied with the blood vessels. So here comes the blood capillary. So this is the blood capillary. Okay. See, towards the inner lining of the alveoli, there is a presence of lecithin. This lecithin, it forms a thin lining towards the inner wall of the alveolus. So this is called as what? Lecithin. So this lecithin, it is nothing but phospholipid. So this lecithin is a phospholipid. So its main function here. So this is what the lecithin, a thin coating covering present on the inner wall of the alveolus. See here, this lecithin, its main function is it acts as a surfactant. So it reduces the surface tension, okay, so that it prevents the alveoli, lung alveoli from collapsing. So as it reduces the surface tension, it reduces the collapsing of the lung alveoli. So that is the function of lecithin. It is nothing but a phospholipid. Phospholipid is nothing but a phosphorus containing lipid, okay. So this is what the alveoli, it is through the wall of the alveoli the exchange of gases takes place, okay. So this will forms the respiratory membrane. So I will explain this respiratory membrane in my later video, okay. So this is what the branching. So this is what the entire respiratory tract, okay. So the respiratory tract begins with external nostrils and end up with alveoli, and it will end up with alveoli. Understood clearly? So now I will write the flow chart again. See, the respiratory tract begins with external nostrils. Begins with external nostrils, followed by the external nostrils opens into nasal chambers. Then the nasal chambers opens into nasopharynx through internal nares. Through internal nares. So the internal nares opens into nasopharynx. Okay, the nasopharynx opens to pharynx, oropharynx, then laryngopharynx. Then it will open into larynx through an opening that is called as glottis. Okay, now the larynx opens into trachea. Opens into trachea. Trachea into primary bronchi, and the primary bronchi into secondary bronchi. Secondary bronchi into tertiary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi opens, it will further divide to form bronchioles. The bronchioles further divides to form terminal bronchioles. Up to this is, so from external nostrils up to the terminal bronchioles is the conducting zone. Is the conducting zone. Okay. Now the terminal bronchioles divides further to form respiratory bronchioles. The respiratory bronchioles divides to form alveolar ducts. Now the alveolar ducts opens into atria. Atria opens into alveolar. Atria opens into alveolar sac, and the alveolar sac contains, and finally the alveoli, and finally the alveoli. Okay. Right, little up. So respiratory bronchioles divides to form alveolar ducts. Alveolar ducts opens into atria. Atria opens into alveolar sac, and the alveolar sac finally is 2, and finally the alveoli. Okay. Sorry, I am saying this alveoli. Okay. So the respiratory tract begins with external nostrils and end up in alveoli. Okay. So I will repeat once. Human respiratory tract begins with a pair of external nostrils that leads to a nasal cavity which is divided into 2 chambers. They are called as nasal chambers. So the nasal chambers through the internal nares opens into nasopharynx. So nasopharynx, then comes the oropharynx, and then comes laryngopharynx. The laryngopharynx, it is through the glottis, it will enter into, it opens into larynx. The larynx opens into a trachea, and trachea divides into 2 branches called primary bronchi, and the primary bronchi divides to form secondary bronchi. Secondary bronchi in turn divides to form tertiary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi divides to form bronchioles, and bronchioles divides to form terminal bronchioles, and terminal bronchioles divides further, okay, into narrowest tubes. They are called as respiratory bronchioles. The respiratory bronchioles divides repeatedly into the alveolar ducts. Alveolar ducts opens into atria. These are the expanded passages. The atria will open into the alveolar sac, and finally the alveoli. Okay. So this is about the respiratory tract. Okay. So I said up to terminal bronchioles is the conducting zone, and from respiratory bronchiole up to the alveoli, this is the respiratory zone. So functionally the respiratory tract divides into 2 zones or 2 regions. Okay. This is a conducting zone and this is the respiratory zone. So what is the function of conducting zone? As the name itself says, so it helps in the conduction of air, atmospheric air from external nostrils to the lungs. Okay. Then once, so this will form the conducting zone. Along with that, the conducting zone also performs a function like it cleans up the air. Main function is conduction of air. Then it also cleans up the air by trapping the dust particles. Warming up of air, so it brings the atmospheric air to a normal body temperature, and it also helps in, it also moistens the air. Okay, so all these are the functions of conducting zone. So then what is the function of respiratory zone? So it is the main area, main region where the exchange of gases takes place. Okay. So you have to remember the respiratory zone, this is for NEET, okay. The respiratory zone begins with respiratory bronchioles and the conducting zone is from external nostrils up to the terminal bronchioles, okay. So this is what the respiratory tract, okay. So in the next video I discuss the lungs, okay. Understood clearly? So today you learned how to draw human respiratory system and the details of trachea, bronchi and its branches up to the alveoli, okay. And this is what the entire respiratory tract from external nostrils up to the alveoli. And you have to remember the conducting zone and as well as the respiratory zone and their functions. Understood? Understood clearly? Okay, thank you.